Hello, I'm Annalouise, and today I'm going to be talking about hope is in the heart. Have you ever had times in your life or even in your day where you feel more hopeful or less hopeful, maybe tripping into despair or things aren't possible, or a sense of, really feeling hopeful? I think it's very human to navigate the undulations of hopefulness or despair to a lesser or bigger degree, right? Like some people might have their hopefulness calibration generally higher, and others might have it lower. And also we might pass through different phases of our life where we perhaps feel more hopeful or less hopeful. And it may also be affected by circumstances, like perhaps when we feel under the weather or not very well for a while, we can start to feel like, oh, is this ever going to end? A sense of despair or hopelessness. So can you recognize that sense of an undulation, either smaller or greater in yourself? And where would you say you are at the moment in terms of your general sense of hopefulness or despair? Yeah, just to get like some information for ourselves as we start talking. I think this is an interesting topic because I think there are some things we can say about hope that helps us ground it more into what's truly happening in the body. And that may give us access to being able to feel in a hopeful place more often. And why might we want to feel in a hopeful place? Well, hopefulness is linked to our power to heal. It's linked to our sense of happiness. And of course, it's linked to the sense of like how possible we think things are in the world around us. Let's just to get us to tune in a little bit to the different vibrations between hopefulness and a lack of hopefulness. Let's just drop in together. So if you can close your eyes and you can conjure up first a sense of when you felt hopeful. And it could be around a really small thing or a bigger thing. If nothing comes to mind, you can just come into current time and think about something that you could feel hopeful for over the next few days, however small. And as we come into that sense of hopefulness, what do you notice? What changes do you notice in your body? What changes do you notice to your sense of awareness, your global sense of awareness? Does it feel more out in the world or more in, like right inside of you? Does it feel more connected? Have a sense of connectedness or a sense of isolation? And once again, coming back to where you feel it in your body, if you could pinpoint where that might be. And then let's just touch into the other territory of feeling despair or hopelessness. And perhaps think of a time where that has been present for you. And also notice what happens in your awareness. What happens in your body. What do you notice in your mind? The types and quantity of your thoughts. and where your attention is focused. How contracted or expanded it feels. And then let's go back into hopefulness again. So perhaps picking a different example now. And experiencing, bearing witness to the changes that you're seeing and feeling in yourself with your perception, sensations, the awareness. So I'm obviously curious about your experience, and I would love you to post below so that we can all share together. And for now, I'll share what my experience seems to be and see whether you resonate at all with it. I notice when I'm in a place of more hopefulness, like my heart feels like a bit warm and fuzzy. My heart feels expanded. I can feel like my heart expanding. I feel my awareness is further, it includes more, it's more open, it's less fixed on specific things. It has a greater sense of everything's included. And then when I go into despair and hopelessness, my experience seems to be that I come up more into my head and it feels like my heart shuts down more. And then it's almost like I have these lots of thoughts running and I'm sort of latching onto them, latching on to all of the potentially bad things that might happen or that could happen. Feels like my awareness is sort of like more enclosed, more contracted. Yes, I don't know whether any of that feels resonant for your experience too. Yeah, it was interesting. I was feeling, over the weekend, I was feeling this like expansive, hopeful, heart expanded place. And yesterday I had a bodywork session and feel so blessed, like we were touching into some stuff that's stored in my body that afterwards meant that I was feeling vibrations of hopelessness and despair. And it was really curious for me to witness my own process because I could just feel how much more I was in my head with those feelings. And like my mind was sort of racing more. And so I invited myself down to bring my awareness more into my heart. And with that, it helped soften those thoughts and it helped soften the sense of despair and hopefulness and hopelessness. So I'm curious about possibly how hopefulness is almost a sense of fully occupying our hearts. And there are all sorts of reasons why we may end up disoccupying. What I mean by disoccupying is when we're sort of disconnecting energetically and physically in some way from a part of our body. So there might be some contraction, some sense of not wanting to be in that place in our body, not being embodied in that place, like we're sort of energetically moving away from that. And that happens often, right? We can imagine that like when we've perhaps injured ourselves, if we're not conscious of like being with an injury, we can very easily sort of have this sensation of wanting to leave that part, like not feel that part. And what seems to be true for me, and I don't know whether it's true for you or anyone else, but in my experience it seems to be true that if something traumatic happens, then we can habitually become slightly disoccupied in a part of our body. And I think that happens very often, again in my experience, very often in parts of our heart. We might have had a big trauma or some grief, or even something minor, but it's set up a little contraction or a change in our heart, which means that we're not fully present in our hearts. And that may inhibit in some way our sort of openness and hopefulness. And it's interesting, it has been shown that traumatic events do actually change the physiology of, or can actually change the physiology of the heart. And I'm a great believer that with the right type of presence and therapeutic connection, that these changes can be softened and released and undone with patience and time. And that's one thing that I'd perhaps like to touch on, is that if you are someone that maybe feels a more ongoing sense of despair and hopelessness, there are all sorts of possibilities open to us, aren't there, in this modern world, like all sorts of ways that we may choose to find help in that. But acknowledging the fact that we are feeling hopeless can often feel the first step, because otherwise it might shut down every other possibility. Because if we're feeling hopeless, we might just anyone suggests something like, no, oh, that's not going to work, that's not going to help me, I've tried that before. And so then for me, it's like recognizing, there's a vibration of hopelessness here, a vibration of despair. First of all, it's about meeting that and being tender with that part, which then might provide a doorway into being able to rest in greater possibility. And I'll mention it here because it often doesn't get mentioned in sort of the traditional media, is that I think having a really wonderful bodywork practitioner who's super intuitive can feel the parts in our body that we aren't able to feel for ourselves in some way. We may be able to feel something, but we're not able to necessarily liberate what needs to be liberated. Having a witness who is able to hold really deep space for us and to be able to listen through the body and to be super attuned to the multiple dimensions that might be activating something within us can be really helpful. Certainly that's been an important part of my journey and the support that I seek. So hopefulness, if hopefulness is in the heart, then it feels like it disconnects it from an outcome. And if it's disconnected from an outcome and it's in the heart, it feels very current time. It's just a hopefulness. It's like it's holding all time. When we talk about hope, often we fix it to a timeline, right? We imagine that something needs to happen when and in a certain way, and my sense is that's perhaps not a particularly useful sense of hopefulness. Because if it doesn't happen that certain way or by this timeline, we might feel disappointed. Whereas if we're able to hold hopefulness as is, whatever's unfolding, there's this sense of heart opening and timelessness and being able to see things in a much, much bigger timeline. Bigger than ourselves, bigger than our lives, bigger. It rests in a space which feels to me, more like real truth. And that's not denying any pain or suffering at all. It's not, ignoring all of that. But it's really being in the truth of our heart. And I think there are some people that really embody this. Like before I was recording this, I was just picturing like sort of perhaps someone next to someone who was dying, maybe a priest or someone with a huge open heart, and they're just holding that space, or a nurse, or they're just holding that space of love and connection. And whatever happens with the person in front of them, it's almost like that's unwavering, that quality, because there's some deep knowing inside that all is okay. Yeah. One of the other things I think about cultivating hopefulness is it is a bit of a virtual circle, so that if we feel more hopeful, I think it attracts more of that back into ourselves. And if we feel more despair, again, it can attract more of the same back into ourselves. I invite us to contemplate more on where we are on the scale, be able to become more sensitive to where we feel hopefulness and despair in our body, be able to see whether we can invite hopefulness when we're feeling not so hopeful. And I'll just give you a little trick here. So for instance, I just imagine something not good is happening in your life. Let's take an example. Let's take an example. Maybe one of us has lost their jobs and we can't imagine we're going to find another job. And then someone just comes along and says, you know what? Someone was advertising for a job and I think you'd be the perfect person for it. And this, and this, and this, and this. And if you come along now, I think, can you feel how quickly the rise in hope comes? Just from one moment to the next. What if we could allow that, irrespective of the external information? It's something, I think it's almost like a little game to play with ourselves, right? And if you are experiencing hopelessness and despair as an more ongoing state, my heart is so with you. I connect to the pain and suffering in that. And I wish that maybe you might be able to find some support in whatever way feels true for you to help you navigate this time. Thank you very much for listening. Do, as I say, post your thoughts below. It's so helpful to share together. And if you've liked this video, press like, and you can also subscribe to the channel and get notifications. And if there's anyone you think it might resonate with, it might be helpful for, might create an interesting discussion for you to talk about all of these areas and how you experience them, do share it. I'd love you to share it in any way that feels prompted in you. And if you want to know more about me, go to wwe.resonating.love. Sending you so much love and light and inspiration.